the two Aramaic words Jesus used, Ephatha and Ananura, that open mind, eyes and heart. For centuries, many people have read the words attributed to Jesus without realizing that some of his most powerful teachings were spoken in Aramaic. Hidden within that ancient language are expressions that were never meant to be ordinary words. They were spoken as moments of awakening, signals that called the human spirit back to its original awareness. Among those sacred expressions are two phrases that few people today truly understand. Spoken by Jesus in a moment of healing, Ephatha. The other emerges from the deeper mystical language of light, known among early spiritual seekers, Ananura. Together, these two words form a symbolic key that points toward the opening of the mind, the awakening of the eyes, and the illumination of the heart. In the ancient world where Jesus lived and taught, words carried a significance that modern language has largely forgotten. Aramaic was not simply a tool for communication, but a vessel for meaning, emotion, and spiritual intention. When a teacher spoke certain words, those sounds were believed to awaken something within the listener. They were not only statements, but invitations to see reality differently. One of the most striking examples appears in the Gospel narrative, when Jesus encounters a man who could neither hear nor speak clearly. According to the text, Jesus looked upward and pronounced a single Aramaic word, "If." The meaning recorded in the passage is simple yet profound: be opened. In that moment, the ears of the man were opened and his tongue was released. Yet many early interpreters believed that the significance of this moment reached far beyond a physical healing. Within the symbolic language of spiritual teaching, the opening of ears represents the awakening of perception. The human mind, often overwhelmed by noise, fear, and distraction, loses the ability to hear truth clearly. When Jesus spoke Ephatha, he was not only restoring hearing to one individual, he was demonstrating a principle that appears throughout many ancient teachings. Awakening begins when the inner senses are opened. This idea appears again in several early mystical traditions that grew around the teachings of Jesus. They suggested that human beings live surrounded by a deeper reality that remains hidden until perception changes. When the inner ear begins to listen differently, the soul gradually recognizes a wisdom that was always present, but rarely noticed. The word Ephatha, therefore, becomes more than a historical detail preserved in Scripture. It becomes a symbol of the moment when awareness begins to expand. It invites the mind to open beyond habitual thinking and encourages the spirit to become receptive to a deeper truth that has always been waiting to be heard, while Ephatha represents the opening of perception. Another expression from the ancient Aramaic tradition points toward the awakening of inner light. The phrase Ananura is often interpreted as a call toward illumination, a reminder that light is not merely a physical phenomenon, but a symbol of awareness itself. In the spiritual language of many early seekers, light represented the presence of divine understanding entering human consciousness. This idea appears frequently in mystical interpretations of the teachings of Jesus. Light is described as something that already exists within the human spirit, waiting to be recognized. The purpose of spiritual awakening is not to create that light, but to uncover it. When awareness begins to shift, the individual gradually realizes that the illumination they were searching for has always been present. The phrase Ananura reflects this moment of recognition. It suggests the emergence of inner brightness, the moment when perception begins to see beyond surface appearances. In this sense, the awakening of the eyes does not refer only to physical sight. It refers to the ability to perceive meaning, purpose, and truth within the events of life. When Ephatha and Ananura are considered together, they form a symbolic progression. First, the ears open to hear what was previously ignored. Then the eyes awaken to see what was previously hidden. The result is a transformation of the heart, the center of understanding and compassion that guides human action. Imagine beginning your journey with the two most powerful Aramaic words that open everything. A complete guide, correct sound, full meaning, and sacred protocol exists for those who feel the call. Check the pinned comment in many ancient traditions. Awakening was never seen as a sudden miracle, but as a gradual unfolding of awareness. Sacred words served as reminders of that process. They pointed the listener toward a deeper reality and invited them to step into a new way of seeing the world. As the understanding of these ancient words deepens, a pattern begins to appear that was recognized by many early seekers who reflected on the teachings of Jesus. Awakening was never described as something external that suddenly enters a person from outside. Instead, it was portrayed as the unveiling of something that had always existed within the human spirit. The language of Aramaic often captured this idea through expressions that pointed toward the rediscovery of inner awareness. In this context, the phrase Ananura becomes particularly meaningful. The word nura in Aramaic refers to light. But not only the light seen by the eyes, it also represents clarity, understanding, and the illumination of the mind. When ancient teachers used this word, they were speaking about the moment when confusion begins to dissolve and perception becomes clear. The teachings associated with Jesus frequently used the symbolism of light to describe spiritual awakening. In several early interpretations, the light was never something distant or unreachable. It was described as a presence that already existed within human consciousness. The challenge was not to obtain it, but to recognize it. Ephatha and Ananura together illustrate this process of awakening. One word opens the ear of perception, inviting the soul to listen more deeply. The other reveals the presence of light that begins to illuminate the inner landscape of the mind. Through this unfolding awareness, the individual starts to perceive life with greater clarity and understanding. If you feel drawn to go further, a guide already exists. The two most important Aramaic words, Ephatha plus Ananura, that symbolize the beginning of everything. Correct sound, full meaning, and a sacred protocol for those two words. The door is open. Check the pinned comment. For many early spiritual communities, sacred words served as markers along the path of awakening. They reminded the listener that the journey toward understanding begins not with acquiring new information, but with opening the awareness that was always capable of perceiving truth. The ancient traditions surrounding the teachings of Jesus often emphasized that awakening does not happen all at once. It unfolds gradually as perception becomes more attentive to the deeper dimensions of life. At first, the human mind tends to interpret everything through habit, expectation, and inherited beliefs. Yet when awareness begins to open, a new perspective slowly emerges. Within this unfolding process, the heart occupies a central role. In many spiritual traditions of the ancient world, the heart was not considered merely an organ of emotion, but the center of understanding itself. It represented the place where knowledge, compassion, and intuition meet. When the mind opens through perception and the eyes awaken through illumination, the heart becomes capable of recognizing the deeper meaning behind existence. This is why many early interpretations of the teachings of Jesus describe awakening as a transformation of the heart. Words such as Ephatha and Ananura were seen as reminders that awareness expands step by step. First, the individual becomes capable of hearing truth. Then perception begins to see light where there was once confusion. Finally, the heart recognizes the unity that connects all aspects of life. Several mystical traditions connected to early Christianity express this idea through symbolic language about light entering the human being. The light was not understood as something physical, but as the clarity that appears when consciousness becomes attentive to reality. When this clarity grows, fear begins to lose its influence, and understanding replaces uncertainty. Through this lens, the sacred words attributed to the Aramaic language of Jesus serve as invitations rather than commands. They invite the listener to open the mind, awaken the eyes, and allow the heart to rediscover its natural capacity for wisdom. In doing so, they remind the seeker that the path toward awakening is not hidden in distant places, but already present within the depth of human awareness. As the journey of understanding continues, the deeper meaning of these ancient expressions begins to reveal something essential about the spiritual teachings associated with Jesus. In many interpretations, preserved across centuries, awakening was never presented as a mysterious power reserved for a few. Instead, it was described as the natural unfolding of awareness when the human spirit becomes attentive to truth. The words Ephatha and Ananura reflect this unfolding in a symbolic sequence that mirrors the inner journey of awakening. When Jesus spoke, Ephatha, the command to open, was not limited to the ears of one individual. It represented the moment when perception itself begins to change. The mind, previously confined by distraction and confusion, becomes capable of hearing something deeper within the silence of life. As this opening expands, the meaning of Ananura begins to emerge with greater clarity. Light appears not as an external force descending from above, but as an illumination arising within awareness itself. This inner brightness allows the individual to see reality with a new perspective. Events that once seemed random begin to reveal patterns of meaning and purpose. Many early spiritual traditions believed that, when the mind becomes open and the eyes begin to perceive this light, the heart naturally responds with understanding. Compassion deepens, wisdom becomes clearer, and the individual begins to recognize the interconnected nature of life. Awakening, in this sense, becomes less about gaining something new and more about remembering what had always been present. The ancient seekers who reflected on these teachings often described the process as the restoration of vision. Human beings, they believed, are born with the capacity to perceive the deeper order of existence, yet the distractions of ordinary life gradually obscure this ability. Sacred words served as reminders that the path toward clarity begins with openness and continues with illumination. When Ephatha opens the ear of perception, and Ananura reveals the light of understanding, the heart becomes capable of recognizing truth in its simplest form. In that moment, the seeker begins to experience the quiet transformation that many ancient traditions described as the awakening of the soul. The wisdom preserved in the Aramaic language of the ancient world continues to echo through time, because it speaks directly to the human search for understanding. Words such as Ephatha and Ananura remind us that awakening does not require extraordinary circumstances. It begins with a simple shift in awareness, a willingness to open perception and recognize the light that already exists within. Throughout the teachings attributed to Jesus, the invitation to awaken appears again and again. Listeners are encouraged to seek the kingdom within, to look beyond appearances, and to listen with a deeper level of attention. These teachings suggest that the transformation of consciousness is not a distant ideal, but a possibility present in every moment. Ephatha represents the first step in this journey, the opening of the inner ear that allows truth to be heard. Ananura follows as the illumination that reveals what had always been hidden in plain sight. Together, these two expressions form a symbolic key pointing toward the awakening of the mind, the eyes, and the heart. Across the centuries, the words spoken in the language of Jesus have carried a quiet resonance that continues to inspire those who search for deeper understanding. Aramaic was more than the language of daily life in the ancient Middle East. It was also a language capable of expressing subtle layers of meaning, where a single word could invite the listener to look beyond the surface of ordinary experience. The expressions Ephatha and Ananura represent two moments within that journey of awakening. One speaks of opening, the other of illumination. Together, they reflect a process that many spiritual traditions describe as the unfolding of consciousness. The mind begins to listen differently. Perception becomes clearer, and the heart gradually recognizes a deeper dimension of life. In the teachings associated with Jesus, this awakening is often described through simple images: lights shining in darkness, seeds growing quietly within the earth, and eyes beginning to see what had always been present. These symbols remind the seeker that the transformation of awareness does not occur through force or struggle. It happens through attention, openness, and the willingness to perceive reality with fresh understanding. The ancient language of Aramaic preserved these insights in a way that continues to resonate even today. When words like Ephatha and Ananura are remembered, they invite us to pause and consider the possibility that the light we search for may already be present within us. The path toward awakening may not be as distant as it appears. Instead, it may begin with something as simple and profound as a word that reminds the soul to open, to see, and to recognize the quiet presence of truth that has always been there. Everything begins with Aramaic words. Ephatha Ananura, a complete guide, correct sound, full meaning, and sacred protocol is now available for those ready to start this journey. The door is open. Check the pinned comment. In the next video, I will reveal another sacred Aramaic word connected to the teachings of Jesus. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and write in the comments what you thought of this content.